Good afternoon, everyone, and a warm welcome to this session, which is anchored on the theme, Leveraging the Potential of the Information Communication Technology to Expand Trade and Investment. In the panels preceding this one, we've of course heard from various governments, both from the United States and from various African countries, as well as private sector representatives, and of course the AFCFTA Secretary General. Over the next 60 minutes, though, we turn our focus to the ICT and technology sector, which is particularly important, right, as we look at the present and future outlook of Africa. My name is Mosam Kize, and I chair Covington's Public Policy and Government Affairs practice based in Johannesburg, South Africa. I'd like to thank Florie Lizer and the CCA team for entrusting me with moderating today's panel. And it would be remiss of me not to pause briefly and to wish Florie and the CCA team a happy 30-year celebration this year. And also to thank Florie and the team for their continued role that they play in building and strengthening relationships between the US and Africa. So to start off, I'm going to set the context, right? It's important to reflect on the current state of play as we look to the future. Today's topic, I would say, is a particularly interesting one, but in many ways, an equally complex one. So what are we talking about today? We're talking about leveraging the potential of ICT to expand one thing, which is what has brought us all here together, and that is trade and investment. It would be safe, at least today, to bet my last dollar on this point. There is broad agreement that Africa's future outlook is exceptionally positive. As we heard from SG Wamgele Mene, the outlook of Africa presents particularly in the context of the AFCFTA, presents unique opportunities and growth trajectory for the continent. Investors in the private sector have a unique opportunity to gain access into a single digital market, which is projected to grow to 1.7 billion people and 6.7 trillion in consumer and business spending by 2030. At the same time, though, of course, we know that the continent, and I must say, much like every other nation in the world, has a myriad of challenges. Ours range from societal, political, environment, and definitely economic. So the potential for African countries to overcome these economic challenges and the answers therein lie in many parts in digitization and technology. So some of the factors that will be part of attaining this growth relate, of course, to regulatory environment that is both predictable and enables innovation, investments in infrastructure, to mention but a few. So I am very, very delighted to share that we have an exceptional panel and that is comprised of experts from various organizations who will actually help us uncover all of these complexities. And so it is my pleasure to introduce our esteemed members of our panel today and to thank them from the offset for their participation. On our panel today, I'll start off by introducing Mamonghai Mahlare, who is CEO. Please wave for us. Beautiful smile. Who is CEO of Takealot Group, which is a diversified e-commerce company with businesses in general merchandise, apparel, and footwear, and on-demand food and groceries. Prior to that, she was managing director for managing director South Africa for Illovo Sugar South Africa, fellow sugar sister in sugar. I used to work in the sugar industry, and Mamonghai has exceptional experience in working in over 11 countries, including Tanzania and Mozambique. She's also worked in various roles previously, including Coca-Cola, SAB Miller, and Unilever. Welcome. Secondly, we've got Vib Jain, who is Regional Managing Director for Africa at the International Development Finance Corporation, DFC. Please wave for us. Welcome, Vib. Vib joined DFC as Regional Managing Director for Africa in 2020. January, as part of DFC's focus on low-income and middle-income countries and increasing its global development impact. Vib also leads the agency's on-the-ground presence in Africa from its regional office here in Johannesburg. Welcome. We also have Nompilo. Please wave for us, Nompilo. Nompilo Morafe, who is Group Chief Sustainability and Corporate Affairs Manager at MTN from 2022. Prior to this appointment, she held the position of Group Executive responsible for this function. Nompilo's key areas of focus include decarbonization, rural connectivity, diversity and inclusion, stakeholder engagement, and protecting human rights. Through her leadership, she aims to drive MTN's sustainability agenda. She champions responsible business practices and creates long-term value for stakeholders while ensuring a positive societal impact. Incredible role. Last but not least, our thorn among the roses, we have Charles Morito, who is Director of Government Affairs for SSA at Google. So Charles is responsible for overseeing, government regulators, socializing digital transformation through policy with a view to achieving economic growth. He took over this role about 6 years ago after being Google's country director for Kenya and interim director for South Africa. He also oversees, among other responsibilities, income, the noise from the other side is a bit, in-country revenue growth, and parallel to his core responsibilities, he also served in the D&I for EMEA, emerging markets, and several other themes. So ladies and gentlemen, please can you join me in giving our panelists a very warm round of applause. So in terms of the run of show, we were going to start off with a panel discussion. I've prepared some questions that we will present to our panelists. We really would love for this to be an interactive session, so to the extent that you have any questions, please jot them down, because near the end we will open the floor up for questions. And then at the end, I'll then ask each of the panelists to just give 30 seconds of a roundup, and then we will conclude the session. So maybe just to start off with, I think there's no shortage of data in terms of what the opportunities for Africa is, particularly in the digital space. And Charles, I'm looking at you for this particular, for the question, and Nompilo as well. I would love to hear from both of you, what opportunities lie ahead actually from your vantage point, and what does a well-implemented digital strategy across Africa actually look like? So I'll start off with you, please, Charles, and then followed by Nompilo.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's an absolute privilege to be here amongst you for this really important conversation around the potential that digital provides to the economic growth for Africa. When I think about it, I like to step back and think about what is the opportunity that lies ahead. And the opportunity at core is really around the demographic dividend that we have. And we cannot talk about the African opportunity without discussing the youth dividends that we have. There are challenges around that, and we need to solve for some of those challenges. The first one being the right skill sets that we need to provide to our young people. A statement that I like to give consistently is that by 2050, more than a third of the world's workforce is going to be in Africa. So that is imperative for us to start preparing that young generation to take the jobs of the future that are going to be opportunities for the world, and then in return bring the resources and the revenue that Africans need. Because no matter what industry we look at, we need to literally put money in people's pockets. When people have disposable income, they can be able to take they'll have increased purchase power, and therefore be able to look at how they can grow themselves and move from that notion of survival to really thriving and to be able to really enjoy the fruits of the world. So the opportunities that are there are sort of threefold in my view. The first one is being able to create jobs that service the world. And that, for me, when I think about AGOA and renewing AGOA and looking at how do we leverage both the Continental Free Trade Agreement, therefore breaking down the physical barriers and borders that have been put on the continent and looking at it fully as one marketplace. The ability to have cross-border data flows, the ability to have free flow of labor across countries, so that Kenyans can be able to work in South Africa and South Africans can be able to work in Nigeria and vice versa. that is really a critical component. So the ability to take those jobs. The second piece is leveraging technology to access new markets. So an SMB in South Africa that sells t-shirts should be a global business from inception, because you have the right tariffs in place, the right logistics in place, and technology can be able to deliver that. And then lastly, the ability to know which customers in New York, in New Jersey, in Japan can be able to buy those products. So those are the three things that I would say off the top are the great opportunities that ICT can be able to bring, and especially when renewing AGOA and the African Continental Free Trade Agreement digital protocol brings to surface.
Thank you so much, Charles. I love how you've included, how you've included the youth dividend. I think, as you mentioned, the future of our continent is absolutely youth, right? And I appreciate how you've, see the future unpack the opportunities as you see them, notifying, of course, the fact that there are, of course, challenges, but really focusing on what the opportunities might be. Nombila, I know at MTN, given your footprint across the continent, also with the very great ambitions that you have as a business, that you absolutely see many, many opportunities. Please may you unpack what those look like from an MTN perspective.
Thank you, Musa, and thank you for having us on your panel. So just to introduce MTN briefly to those that do not know the company, we operate in 19 markets across 2 continents. 17 of those markets are in the African continent. So we always say we're a true pan-African organization. We feel that we understand the continent, we work in the continent, we work with the people of the continent. Having said that, so I'm going to try not to repeat what Charles has mentioned, because I was going to actually say the same thing. So I'm just going to go very basic, that Africans, the AU has defined our dream. We said we're building the Africa we want. Yeah? So within the Africa we want, we speak a lot about humanity, we speak a lot about Africans, we speak a lot about how do we dig ourselves out of poverty. So if you look at the basic of what Charles has mentioned, what is needed? So we're going to talk about opportunities. There's a lot of opportunities in the continent, but if we're going to truly transform digitally the continent, people need to be connected. So starting just from the stats, if you read the GSMA report recently, they spoke about almost 1 billion of Africans are not connected. So if that's the case, and we want to promote trade, and we want to do all of these great initiatives that he's mentioned, that would actually advance young people particularly, how are we going to get it done if people are not even connected, if they don't have access to connectivity? So I think to look at opportunities, that's where we need to start. We need to look at the industries that are growing in the continent, agriculture being one of them. You look at education, I think I won't repeat, I think we've all read the stats around education, particularly of the challenges we had during COVID. I don't think much has changed ever since. So MTN, for instance, we invest about 2 billion into infrastructure annually. That's a big number. So if you look at all those amounts of money, because MTN is not the only one, you still have other MNOs in the continent that are equally investing. What do we have to do? What can we do through partnerships to make sure that what Charles is mentioning is really a realized dreams for all Africans? So that's where I will leave it for now.
Thank you, Nombila. I took 3 words from you. 1, build. 2, trade. 3, connectivity. And I think that's a great segue to you, Mamonghai. I mean, as an e-commerce platform, all 3 of those words are critical to you, right? And so I'm interested to hear from you, what role do you see from a Takealot perspective in technology playing in actually accelerating the trade, right, across the continent? Of course, you've got a great footprint in the Takealot space, but I'm interested to hear what your perspective is in that regard.
Oh, absolutely. I think it's, e-commerce exists only if there is connectivity. That is a starting point. And when you think about what the opportunities are, you got to look at what has been achieved, particularly in South Africa. We're still only about 4% of total retail, which means it's still very much a nascent sector. What the power of the e-commerce has been about how do you drive the democratization of access to quality retail, because right now we can provide the same service to somebody living in the urban areas as much as it is in rural. So now that you don't have big malls with all of the selection in Kuruman or in Kakamas, it does not mean you're no longer excluded from access to those products. So that's the first point. The second is what we have is a marketplace in all of our businesses. And what that means is that the people of South Africa can become their own jobs. You no longer have to rely on going to an existing business to get a job. When we started the marketplace, we had about 124 SMEs that were trading on the platform. Today, we are talking about over 8,000, and they make up over 50% of the trade that is on the platform. Now, that's one business that's only about 13 years old. Now, multiply that by all of the countries that exist, on the continent, and ask yourself, if you 100x that, what does that mean for the inclusion of youth in the economy? And therefore, I think it is important to think about, digital access as a means to creating opportunities for economic participation and democratizing access to services for all Africans in every single market that you operate in. And that's how I would see the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Mamocha. I must say, I always have to give a plug for where I come from. Just on the topic around democratization of e-commerce, I can proudly say that Takealot actually reaches Madadiel. So in the expansion of your marketplace from 124 SMEs to 8,000, that is pretty exceptional. But what it has meant is the democratization and access to amazing products. So, and I can only imagine, as you say, what the future looks like. Imagine if we have so many more platforms, so many more opportunities, and what that really means for the future of South Africa, certainly, but the continent at large. So I do want to pivot to you there, because I think that, growth doesn't just happen, right? Growth often needs investment, right? And I think from the perspective that you sit at the DFC, that is, of course, that's your daily bread, really. And so I wanted to ask, how was the DFC, as America's development finance institution, actually investing in ICT on the continent?
Thank you. Thank you for that question. Just to briefly introduce the DFC, since we are a relatively new agency, so the U.S. International Development Finance Corporation is the U.S. government's development finance institution. We are the successor entity to OPIC, for those of you who have been investing in Africa for some time and are familiar with OPIC. And we also merged with a section of USAID. DFC, similar to other development finance institutions, has a triple mandate. First is to support commercially sustainable projects. The second is to support development impact with each of our investments. And the third is to align with U.S. foreign policy. And as this forum is a testament to, increasing two-way trade and investment between Africa and the U.S. is a top priority for the U.S. government. So, with that background, just to give you a bit of context on what DFC is doing in Africa, and then I can answer your question about how we're investing in technology. DFC has close to $11 billion in our investment portfolio across sub-Saharan Africa. So we invest across sectors, across most countries in sub-Saharan Africa. And technology is a sector that is of increasing importance and focus for us. When DFC launched in 2020, we were given a very broad mandate to partner with African businesses in addition to U.S. businesses. So we no longer require that you have to be an American company to get support. So to those in this room who are operating African businesses, we can certainly consider your business for financing. In the technology sector, technology currently comprises under 10% of our global portfolio, and we'd like to grow that significantly. We've been investing across the technology sector in a few different ways. The first is we've been investing in hard infrastructure required for connectivity. So I'm sure many in this room are familiar with Liquid or Africa Data Centers. We've actually provided a $300 million loan to Africa Data Centers, the largest Pan-African data center operator, for expanding their operations in Kenya, South Africa, and most recently we did a launch ceremony in Ghana, announcing our intention to support the business in Ghana as well. We've invested in mobile telecom towers and energy for mobile telecom towers through some of our investments in investment funds. We've invested in a number of private equity funds that invest in technology, including Convergence Partners Digital Infrastructure Africa Fund, and also some VC funds like Norskin 22 and Novastar's People and Planet Fund that invest in tech-enabled businesses and technology through the lens of early-stage companies. And then finally, I should also mention we've invested in a number of Pan-African businesses. So to Charles's point about how the African Continental Free Trade Agreement will enable more investment in technology, we've actually invested in a business called Africell for their operations in the Gambia, Sierra Leone, DRC, and Uganda. And so free trade agreements enabling businesses to be more regional in nature will only increase the amount of investment that DFC is able to make. By expanding the markets that companies can reach, by making it easy to operate cross-border, and by allowing us to benefit from the synergies of regional integration. And then finally, I was going to say we've invested in technology not just from the high-level, large infrastructure level, but also looking at how can we enable connectivity. So one of the investments we made is actually close to home for you, Charles, in Kenya. It's in a business called POA. POA Internet actually provides low-cost broadband access for low-income communities in Kenya, and it does so at a very cost-effective price point. So it really helps bridge the digital divide. And so in terms of what we're looking to do as an investor is really invest in hard infrastructure, connectivity at the more local community level, and also in tech-enabled businesses.
Thank you so much, Vib. As you were talking, I was just hearing dollar signs, dollar signs, dollar signs. And please, I really do want to underscore that Vib actually did mention that there are instruments available to companies that are actually, based in Africa. So please heed the call. She told us about all of the investments that have already been made, but many more stand to be made. So, and I think as you were sharing, it was kind of like you were taking a continental trip, and so that really draws me to the next topic, which is the AFCFTA. Charles, this is a topic that you are very passionate about, as are many of us in the room, particularly within the context of technology, right? I think that for so many years, so many of us have been so excited about the potential for actually harmonizing regulations more generally, but particularly in the technology space. And so I'd love to hear from you, what do you see as the actual opportunities for given the digital protocol in the context of the AFCFTA?
Definitely, that's a question that's really opportune at this particular point when we have seen the digital protocol of the Continental Free Trade Agreement being moving along quite rapidly. But it's also not just about the Continental Free Trade Agreement's digital protocol. It's what's happening in member states, right? So South Africa is working on the Data and Cloud bill, which hopefully will become law soon. Kenya has done the same. Nigeria is doing the same. Rwanda, Togo, and the list goes on. And the reality is, when you think about the African marketplace, we cannot start dividing it up into the 54, 55 countries, depending on who you ask, and really start looking at the borders that really break the continent apart. We really need to start looking at the opportunity of the 1.3 billion people now, looking to scale to 2.5 billion by 2050, and looking at how can we be able to create businesses that can scale beyond the natural borders that exist at the moment. And it's a really interesting time, because when you look at the inflection point of what artificial intelligence stands to bring to the continent, simplifying the delivery of education, simplifying the verification of medicines across borders, looking at how can you be able to apply AI for cross-border weather forecasts and the like, and really leveraging technology to scale businesses, then the ability to start moving those goods from point to point so that businesses are no longer a Rwandan business, but actually a Pan-African business, whereby, as Vib said, that you can then put a lot more capital that will help scale that business. And when you scale that business, you can reduce the cost of production. And therefore, at the end of the day, the end consumer benefits from the scalabilities of these businesses. So when I look at the Continental Free Trade Agreement, I think there's a couple of things that we need to work on, specifically around the digital protocol. One is really look at the implementation of cross-border data flows. That's really, really critical. The second piece is around IP, and really making sure that as people look at IPs from one country, they respect that IP across borders, because that is something that really is challenging. And then thirdly is around payments and access to financing. So payments is a big, big challenge. The Continental Free Trade Agreement Secretariat, as well as Afri-Exim Bank, passed and worked and collaborated on the PAP system. This is really monumental. The ability to have a Nigerian business person deal with a Ghanaian business person, CD to Naira, without having to convert to US dollars, whereby you start losing value, is going to be a game changer across the continent. So we need to start looking at how the digital infrastructure breaks down from a policy perspective the challenges that are there, but we then start implementing those, because it's one thing to have an excellent protocol. The second level will be for member states to actually adopt and implement those. And once we see those two things happening, we really will start seeing the growth, especially on e-commerce.
Thank you, Charles, covering key topics which I think keep many of us up at night: cross-border, IP, payments, access to financing, trade, a lot of issues that keep a lot of us up at night. But I really think that you covered one of the topics that I know, Mamonga, you at the Takealot Group are also considering, particularly within this opportunity of the AFCFTA, right? So please share with us just some of your thinking, really, with respect to the movement of goods around across the continent from a Takealot perspective.
Yeah, I think when you think about the movement of goods, today it's almost impossible to be able to have, Takealot even in Eswatini, right? Why? Because one, you have to consider that it's a different currency. And even if it's the same value, it is still a different currency. So you have to show a different currency to a market that is right next door. And then secondly, you have to consider, the movement. Physically, you can move the goods across. Then there's, all of the trading agreements that you need to be considerate of. And then you must remember, will you be able to enable the reverse logistics? Can you provide the same service to all of those markets as you would in your own country? And as you think about the expansion, then you go even further away from South Africa, and you get to, Kenya, Tanzania, Uganda, Nigeria, etc. It becomes just more complex. It's the logistics, it's payments, it's, all of the trade, regulations that you need to deal with. That's part of the complexity. However, being able to overcome those will open up the continent in its truest form, right? Because, at the end of the day, unless we can trade with each other easily, a lot of the other stuff just becomes what we talk about in conferences. It just does not move us forward. So it's how do we enable that and be able to leverage scale of what the continent provides. And so these are some of the opportunities that we see, that we would like to be able to see some of the opportunities to unlock it. So having even a single currency, that would be a big step forward. Being able to enable goods to move between countries. So us being able to sell to South Africans goods that are produced in Nigeria and vice versa. You know, and when you think about what one ecosystem does in terms of providing opportunities for scale, imagine now that, you know, the South African SME now is, you know, opening up to like multiple countries and many more million customers, right? What that will unlock in terms of scaling across even the sub-region, you know. So I think that's where the opportunity is, and it's definitely a big one. And to be able to access it, we do need to figure out how do we solve for currency and trade and goods movement, because we tend to make it easier for things to come into our countries, but not for us to do the reverse trade. You know, as we've seen with a number of, you know, you've seen the explosion of Shein in South Africa, you've seen Temu also, you know, increase in South Africa, and for them it's very easy to trade into the continent, right? And I think we need to make it easier for the continent to also do the same within the continent and outside of the continent, because we have amazing services and products here, and we need to make sure that we also get a piece of the global trade pie.
Thank you so much, Mamonga. I think, you know, ultimately, you know, what you're actually saying is the very cornerstone of what the AFCFT stands for, right? Which is to build, you know, our capabilities, both from an industrialization perspective and everything else, so that we are able to be self-sufficient in many, many ways. You know, as you were talking, covering, you know, the ease of doing business, interoperability, etc., I was seeing Vib also, you know, nodding quite passionately. I must say we remain very, very optimistic, Mamonga, that you and the team can do it, and that you will do it. You are, you know, you are World Cup champions, guys. We are a nation that is the World Cup champions of the world. And so we absolutely can find these solutions. And I believe that South Africa's win, by the way, is an African win. It's not ours only. And so I remain optimistic as a South African and an African that we will absolutely find those challenges. But I just want to go to you, Vib, because I know that you did want to weigh in on this particular point.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to add in to the excellent comments that you provided, basically by saying, I think a lot of times as DFC, we have conversations with other development finance institutions or, you know, companies that are looking to raise capital for technology. And I think what's missing from that conversation that you so aptly summarized is that it's impossible to have a vibrant technology sector without physical infrastructure. And I think a lot of the way that DFC sees itself as playing a role in the sector is not only through direct investment in technology, but also by investing in the roads, in the rail, in the ports, in the physical infrastructure, that in the mobile towers that enable the movement of goods. Because, I mean, so often, you know, we hear about how Africa can leapfrog, and yet while there is the potential to leapfrog using technology and to be more efficient using technology, ultimately you're going to hit a roadblock if you don't have the ability to move goods or people. And so I wanted to just add on to that, just to say that I think that's a big focus for us when we invest in technology. It's often by investing in the supporting infrastructure of that technology.
Thank you, Vib. And I think that's a great segue actually to you, Nompilo. I think that, I mean, it's apparent, it's very obvious to me that, you know, the private sector cannot do it alone. It's even more apparent that the government cannot do it either. And so there really has to be this collaboration, you know, across private sector, you know, civil society as well as government. And so I just want to hear from you, Nompilo. I mean, you mentioned in your opening remarks the extent of your business across Africa and beyond. And so I wanted to hear from you your experience with working with governments, as well as, you know, maybe you can share with us a case study or two of when partnership has really, really worked quite well and for a positive outcome.
Yeah, thanks, Musa. So, listening to this conversation, just to think quickly of the case studies that MTN has seen and we've participated in, especially with FDIs like DFC, etc., is that if you look at what we spoke about rural coverage, for instance, it's a very difficult area, and MTN wants to reach 95% by 2025, right? But having said that, you will read a lot of stats that says coverage is not an issue anymore. We have a different problem called people don't have devices to use when you're talking about technology, for instance. But it depends on where you're coming from, right? So, of course, like you said, people can reach Matatiela, but probably they can't reach Kwaskwaja somewhere else. So it's that type of game where we always have to be in partnerships. Companies like MTN invest in infrastructure a lot. So does other MNOs as well. But we really need to look at areas where we can grow. And in terms of scaling these projects, we're going to need to raise a lot of funding in partnerships with governments, the state, and all other enterprises. Another area that I wanted to mention, like I said, another challenge that we've seen in this game of technology and digitalization, etc., is the issue of affordability itself. So we spoke a lot about having young people in the continent, that people are very young, but they're looking for jobs, they're looking for entrepreneurial skills, they're looking for a lot of things. So if we're really going to scale projects and we're going to make sure that trade is a reality for all Africans, we all need to come together and look at digital skills, for instance. So I can say a lot of stats, but the truth of the matter in the continent is that we're seeing that young people, firstly, the coverage is still an issue in some areas. Affordability of the services themselves, meaning some people still do not have a smartphone. It might look simple for all of us here because we actually have one. But if you look at the stats, the majority of Africans do not own a smartphone. Forget being able to use one. So if that's the case, what can we do as private and public sector and the government and the state and everyone together to make sure that we can scale and manufacture probably smartphones in the continent, which is still something that we're still all grappling with, using all types of funding that we can get through the ACFTA, through the companies that are funding technology in the continent. So there's a lot, in my view, the discussion we're having is that there's a lot of opportunities, but they can only happen if we partner. So just as a last case study, in Uganda, for instance, recently, MTN took about 45 investors to the country, to Uganda, to actually promote. We're not in the business of agriculture or tourism, etc. But we feel that for a company of our size, it is our responsibility to promote trade in the continent. So through the access we have to investors, we do facilitate that conversation that says, Africa is one continent. South Africans have a lot of technology, we have a lot of agriculture here, we have a lot of people that invest in agriculture. So we took them to Uganda and look at opportunities, and that project has worked very well. So it's going to take that type of will from companies that you don't say that I'm in a technology business, so agriculture has nothing to do with me. That's not true. It's all our business to make sure that making sure that trade is happening in the continent. And we need to make sure that we pull together throughout all sectors, because now I'm listening to these two ladies that I'm going to speak to after this, so that we make sure that when we go to Cameroon, you need to come with, because we keep having to do that, where we look at which country has got what strength in which trade, and we make sure that people meet and connect with each other, because we're a connectivity business.
Thank you, Nompilo. I think I look forward to the collaboration and the outcome of your discussions, because I think we're all going to be beneficiaries of it. So, Charles, I am looking at you. I think Nompilo, really through her examples that she shared, we saw how collaboration across, within the continent can work really, really well, particularly when, companies, private sector partner with governments. We are at an AGOA summit, Private Sector Forum, and so I want to hear from you how you think African governments can partner better with the US, right, to actually promote greater investment into the continent.
Thank you. Before I respond to that, I just wanted to build on a point that Nompilo made regarding devices, because this is a massive problem across the continent. But we've seen certain situations, and perhaps it's a good case study, of where private sector, government, and telcos come together to really change the way people can access low-cost devices. So there's a particular initiative that just launched actually earlier this week in Kenya, which is EDAC, whereby they're manufacturing devices, smart devices, for a low cost in Kenya. But that is a collaboration between different countries, between different sectors. What the government has done is lowered the tariffs and taxes for components which are coming into Kenya, because that is a significant cost for even people who are trying to assemble devices on the continent. So that is one thing that governments have to do, putting the policies in place that will enable more devices to be in the hands of individuals, because the prices are astronomical compared to the earning power of the average African. The second piece is instituting the right modes of retail. Basically, how do you get those devices into the hands of consumers? And in Kenya, Safaricom has been able to actually partner and is part of this project. So they are taking the devices from the manufacturing plant and getting them into the retail stores. The third component is cost, because even if you lower the cost to about $50 for the average Kenyan, the average African, is still a lot of money to spend on a device. In Europe and in the US, most people actually don't know the cost of a device holistically, because you pay for a plan and you get the device and you pay over it over time. So what Google has done is come up with a device locking mechanism, DLC, which is put on the OS level, which enables consumers to purchase for the equivalent of 20 cents a day. You get the device, you get data, and you get minutes to talk, right? And with those three things, and paying it over a 9-month period, when the device becomes yours, it makes it affordable, right? Because data is expensive and the devices are expensive. So we need to come up with innovative ways to really think about how do we get technology into the hands of people at an affordable rate. And now to your question regarding how does Africa collaborate more with the US, I think it's a couple of different things, and we're already starting to see that. One is creating an enabling environment for business to thrive. Google is keen to continue investing on the continent. 3 years ago, we announced that we're going to invest $1 billion onto the continent, looking at a couple of different things, including infrastructure, whereby we've put a subsea cable running on the west coast of Africa from Portugal to Cape Town, and with landing branches in Togo, Lagos, Namibia, as well as St. Helena. So those are only possible if the right business environment is there. And it's incumbent on African governments to really make sure that the governance structures are there and that the right ability to get licenses, right? So if you're landing a cable in Nigeria, you need a landing license. If it takes too long to actually acquire it, Google will just pass Nigeria, right? So we need to ensure that the investments coming from the US and US companies are able to actually land on the continent, because perhaps I'm speaking out of turn. I think that there is more capital looking to be invested in Africa than opportunities, right? So we just need to create that enabling environment for that capital to be invested on the continent. The second thing that we need to do, working with the US and Africa, is skills transfer. And this is something that we've already started seeing a lot of. So you see the ability of people from the US coming to Africa, getting work permits for short periods of time, but ensuring that you have young African talent who are shadowing and taking and learning from those experts from the US. We need to do a lot more of that, and we need to do that. I urge us to do that beyond the 3-4 big economies in Africa. We need to think about Mali, we need to think about other countries, Chad, Sierra Leone, and the like, because Kenya, South Africa, Nigeria, Ghana, we're seeing a lot of that already inflows, but we need to spread that love. The third thing is for the US to look at commercial diplomacy, right? We've all heard the element that, we don't want aid, we want trade, right? So we need the US to look at Africa as a potential for trade, not aid, because there's so much that the continent has to benefit the US and vice versa. So the ability to really look at that and get to the table as equals when we're negotiating is absolutely critical. I'll pause there.
Thank you very much, Charles. I am getting told that we are nearing the the conclusion of our session. So I do want to open it up to the floor for a couple of questions. Do we have a roving mic, or do we? I see one over here, two over there. Any others? Three over there. I think let's start with that. If you can please start by just introducing your name, your organization that you come from. Very short question, and then please, can you just let us know who you're addressing it to? Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much. I don't know about short, but yeah.
Definitely has to be short. Thanks.
All right. My name is Imran Makama. I'm the head of Africa Young Entrepreneurs, South Africa. I'm also an entrepreneur in my own right, providing IT solutions, procurement solutions such as reverse auctioning, market intelligence, cloud solutions. We are looking into cybersecurity. So I'll just ask one. I had a lot of things, actually, as you would imagine, as an entrepreneur in South Africa and a leader of other entrepreneurs in South Africa. So I do not necessarily represent my own opinion, but the opinion of many and the frustration of many entrepreneurs in the country. So I really extensively enjoyed the discussion. So one thing that I wanted to raise around investments and the role of what we call a multinational company like MTN in making sure that the lives of what we call, or the businesses of what we call of SMEs are able to effectively grow through their support. And that should not necessarily be based on imagined stats. And so one of the things I wanted to raise around investment, the first thing quickly. I had a lot of things to say, by the way, but I'm trying to wrap them up in my head quickly. Around investment, how is it that the monopoly, around many of what we call of investment that which is directed in Africa, many times we have seen that it has most of the time benefited the already established companies. And what are some of the what we call solutions, more especially my brother Charles, that are there that you're already thinking about, that we can potentially maybe assist in terms of what to call even developing policy around it that can better assist SMEs to participate in terms of what to call of the opportunities, because we are not looking for handouts. We are looking for opportunities as young entrepreneurs. And I wanted to find out around that in relation to investment. And then in relation to the support that MTN has been greatly involved in terms of what to call promoting the interest of what to call of Africa. And we really applaud you for that particular role. So what are some of the initiatives that if you are already thinking about, if you're not already thinking about, we are available to offer some of what to call, or those solutions that which we are looking for as SMEs in this country and also in Africa. By the way, the organization I represent, it is in over 20 African countries. So there's a conversation around incentives for SMEs for data, for an example. As you know, it's one of the concerns in the country that it's so expensive that a lot of entrepreneurs cannot afford to run their businesses digitally without access to data. I can see the issue of mobile phones, but a simple thing, access to data. There's take a lot here. There are a lot of entrepreneurs that would like to have their products on your platform, but cannot afford to have those products on your platform. And so one of some of the things that which you are already thinking about, if there's nothing at all, we've got tons and tons and tons that can mitigate the frustration on the ground. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I think in short, I would summarize the question as, and I will direct it to you, Charles, even though each of the speakers, I think, Nompilo wants to take it on. So I think even though all of the speakers and the organizations, I think, did unpack the extent to which they, do provide opportunities to SMEs. Nombilo, please do take that. So the sentiment is, these opportunities seem really, really big, but how do, small companies, SMEs actually access them? I'm going to take question number 2. I just wanted to summarize it and then allocate it to you. Question 2 is, gentlemen, over to you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Oscar. My surname is Mbola. My company is Sufficient Grace Trading and Network Trading Enterprise. My question is that from a lady from USA, from the banking sector, what types of a project do you finance? And then what are the criteria? Because I attended a lot of finance symposiums. Some of traditional banks, they will tell you other side of the hand. But the other side of the hand, they will never tell you. When you go there, they will tell you about surety, they will tell you about threshold, they tell you about so many things, sort of things. Which is when they speak during some things like this. They don't give us in details. What other criteria do you finance on the project? What sectors do you look? And then what opportunity are you looking in Africa? Because as far as I understand, each investor has got its own visa. He got his own visa. Someone can say, I'm looking for hydrogen, financing hydrogen sector. Someone can say, I'm looking to financing port infrastructure sector. I'm looking to financing rail infrastructure sector. I'm looking to financing water sanitation sector. I'm looking to financing energy sector, and even energy is broad.
Thank you so much, my brother. Vib, you handed out a $, and I'm so thrilled, and that's the magic of the session, that we have a taker. So please tell us what is the criteria, the sectors, because we have a willing taker, which I'm super, super excited about. Question 3, over to you, sir.
Oops. Thank you for the opportunity. Firstly, congratulations to the panel. Excellent discussion. I have a few comments and questions that I need clarity on. That following on my previous speaker, I represent a company called Conlog, that's South African, and we have about 19 million electricity meters on the continent. So we constantly are innovating meters, water and electricity prepaid. And as you know, with prepaid, when governments collect the money up front, it becomes a viable business solution. So I would also like to know on the innovation side, because we're very much in the infrastructure making, what type of funding can we leverage off your DFC to see how we can then be more creative with our roadmap of projects that we've currently got. It's always a strain on working capital and taking shareholder money, but there's a latency in how you get the projects back. So that's one for you. Secondly, on connected devices, the utilities want all devices connected, and whether it's water meters, electricity meters. However, having a SIM card in the device, it eliminates a failure point on a data concentrator. That means each device will be connected to the network. The problem that we foresee at the moment is the utilities depending on a third-party network for security and dependability. God forbid, let's say one of the telcos go under, all their connected devices then stops working. So this is a challenge we got with the readiness of having connected devices but sitting on a telco's network. How are you securing that with utilities across Africa? The data cost also becomes an issue. And the fallback from NB-IoT right to 2G is also a conversation piece that's an issue at the moment. Whilst we're talking about forward projection on innovation on narrowband IoT, most of the countries are still sitting in 2G. And we got obsolescence there, and we're not ready yet to roll forward in NB-IoT. So as a private sector utility service provider, we're stuck in the middle. Then lastly, to take a lot. I would like to know if you found a resolution to have cross-border trading in movement of products and currency back home, because we also have the same issues. We haven't resolved it in how do we trade. We speak about African free trade, but when we ask how are we doing it and who do we speak to, what is the case study, who's done it before, it seems to be a conversation piece for panelists, but not actually operationalized at the moment. So if we can find solutions or suggestions, I would like to talk to you guys. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and really thank you to all of our colleagues that asked questions, really adding to the conversation. What I'll do is I'll just ask each of our panelists to respond to the questions. Nompilo, do you want to take the first one?
I'll try to remember everybody's question. But I'm going to start with the SMME story. So when I started speaking about challenges, remember I did talk about the issue of affordability. So affordability going across from your device to data to affording the smartphone that he spoke about. How do we bridge the usage gap, especially with young people that are running businesses? So I'm not going to try to explain the whole website of MTN, but you have Renee there. We have a business called MTN Business. Our job at MTN Business is to actually bridge the gap between an SME and the company. So we have a range of solutions for young people that are running businesses, especially on how can we help you with just zero rating your website, for instance, so that your customers can access. We have services from how do we help you with the gentleman. I'm going to answer your question quickly as well, that most of our countries, for instance, our markets, everyone is still on 2G, 3G. 5G is still a dream in most of the continent. So we have a lot of those challenges that you're speaking about, and we've had a lot of people coming through. So that's why MTN has got MTN Business, and I think you guys, we can connect you so that they can help you in terms of how we can optimize and make sure that your businesses are more efficient. And then for your next question, when you talked about access and getting funding, etc., we've just launched a program called Accelerator. In South Africa particularly, I think we spent about 60 million on funding alone. So if you speak to me just after this, I can get you connected with the Accelerator program. They in all provinces in South Africa currently, they're looking for businesses that are more inclined to what we do best, which is connectivity. I heard you mention cybersecurity, etc. That's the core of our business. So I'm sure they could be able to speak to you and see if they can help you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nompilo. Vip, can we go over to you? And then we're going to go to you, Mama Khan. Charles, are you going to take any of the questions? Okay, all right. So Vip, over to you.
Okay, great. So I think this came up in both the second person's question and the final question asker. So DFC does have a very broad mandate. We are able to invest debt, equity, and provide political risk insurance, ranging all the way from $5 million up to $1 billion. And we invest across sectors. So agriculture, health, financial services, technology, energy, other critical infrastructure. So it is a very broad mandate. So there is no one-size-fits-all answer in how we assess a particular project. That will really vary depending on what your business does. But there's a few key principles. First is we're looking for a business plan and to understand who is operating the business. We are not a seed investor, so we're looking to invest in companies that already have a track record, that are able to provide audited financials. In the case of the developer of a large infrastructure project, we'd want to understand your past experience, developing similar infrastructure assets and developing assets in this region. We'd want to understand what your how you're earning revenue, your financial projections, If your project has environmental sensitivity, we'd want to do an environmental assessment. We'd want to make sure that you are conforming to the local labor laws, that you're respecting international labor standards. I mean, there's a whole... It's difficult to summarize in a very detailed way in such a format because I think the answer really is context dependent. That said, if you are looking to learn more about DFC and get more concrete guidance, we have an Africa email address if you're interested in potentially applying or learning more about the requirements. So you can email us at africa@dfc.gov. And I should also mention, just because DFC may not be able to directly fund your business, we're not the only part of the U.S. government that supports and invests in businesses. USAID has a huge program on the continent and often helps incubate smaller or newer businesses when we cannot. There's also a program called Prosper Africa that's doing very much of the same. So there's many different avenues with the U.S. government. We are just but one tool, and I think what distinguishes us from commercial lenders is we are looking to deploy patient capital. We're not singularly focused on our returns, but it is important for us to invest responsibly given that we're an investor of U.S. taxpayer funds. And then just to address your point on SMEs very briefly, while we may not directly finance individual SMEs, because the threshold for our investment is usually larger than a typical SME on the continent needs, we do work with a lot of financial intermediaries, including banks, non-bank financial institutions, and microfinance institutions to support access to finance. And we also work with a number of investment funds who work with smaller businesses. So thank you for the questions.
Thank you so much. I mean, the questions were so important, but also so complicated. And so I am going to ask Biova and Laird just a little bit of grace for us, for my panelists, just like 2 or 3 extra minutes so that Mamongai and Charles can also just respond. 2? That's very generous. Thank you, Mamongai. Over to you. And then lastly was Charles.
Yeah, so when we talk about the support for SMEs, I think we need to also be open-minded about what the solutions might look like. So when you think about the Take a Lot platform as it is, we are a business that enables SME to actually have a route to market. Because if you ask many entrepreneurs, what is your biggest challenge? People tend to think that the first thing is money. But you only have money problems if you have access to market, right? So the number one thing is how do you provide access to market? And that's what we're in the business of. We have over 4 million customers. We provide all of the logistics solutions. We provide the marketing. We even provide support to SMEs around how to become successful when you're operating on the platform, right? So what it requires is entrepreneurs that actually take their business seriously, that it's not a side hustle. It's not something I do because I want to earn extra money for the last 3 months of the year, and then then the next year I'll pick it up again in June. So I think also it's important that the entrepreneurs that are serious and are committed and are willing to go the distance are the ones that will become successful. I think it's also important that as entrepreneurs is how do you use the collective wisdom? Because every single individual or every single business, you have learned something that your neighbor hasn't. And I think we also need to use some of that collective wisdom more deliberately to help each other succeed and become a community that supports each other. So I think there is definitely a huge opportunity with e-commerce in terms of how it enables SMEs to be able to grow. And there are a number of great success stories of individuals that started with literally a product in their kitchen and didn't know what to do with it. How do I go to market? And today, one of those entrepreneurs that started on Take a Lot has been listed in a lot of the brick and mortar businesses. We have like thousands of those success stories. And we have those, and the one thing that is distinct about those individuals is, yes, they had the opportunity like other thousands of SMEs, but they also invested in their business. And that is also what is key, is commitment and stay the distance and work with each other as entrepreneurs, as a collective, to make sure that we share the insights and the learnings to become successful in what we're doing.
Thank you so much, Mamonkhai. Charles, over to you.
I'll try and do this really quickly. So in terms of SMEs, please, I urge you to look at Hustle Academy. Hustle Academy is a program that we're running as Google, which focuses on three things. One, access to markets, which Mamonkhai had just spoken about. Two, how do you put your business online? And three, how do you prepare your business to be able to fundraise? We don't do the fundraising piece or fund typically, but I think that Hustle Academy is a phenomenal sort of program that SMEs need to go through. We've now graduated about 16,000 SMEs across Africa, and we continue to do that. The second piece is a challenge that a lot of African-owned and Black-owned businesses suffer from. They say that they're consistently over-mentored and underfunded. So because of this, we started the Black Founders Fund. We've done 3 cohorts of this. We've deployed $9 million, but that's not the real key. The key is that on those 135 businesses that have gone through the Black Founders Fund cohort, they have then taken another $120 million in follow-on funding, right? And so that really is the key, that a lot of these businesses, what they need is that catalytic initial funding that's between 20 to 50, maybe $100,000, and then they can get to a stage whereby they can be able to actually take now the money that DFC will fund. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Charles. Ladies and gentlemen, it has been an exceptional panel session. So grateful to each of my panelists. In closing, what is your key takeaway and one thing that you will focus on from this session? And please only use one word. I'm going to start with you, Charles. Bring it all the way back. Just one word. What is your key takeaway? And what is one thing that you're going to focus on going forward from this session?
Implementation. We need to implement the Continental Free Trade Agreement.
Okay. And just one word, no hyphens allowed. So yours is implementation. Thank you, Charles. Nombilo, yours?
Partnerships.
Partnerships. Thank you. Mamonkhai, your word is?
It's the same. Collaboration.
Collaboration. Vib, over to you.
You guys took my words. I'm going to say infrastructure.
Infrastructure. Ladies and gentlemen, please thank me. Please, you can thank me. Please join me in thanking our panelists for this wonderful session. Thank you so much.